Welcome to Philosophy 333, Epistemology. I'm James Beebe and I'll be your instructor for this course. I wanted to say a few words in this video about who I am, the syllabus, and how the course is going to operate so that you can know what to expect this semester. First, a couple of words about me. This is my 17th year teaching at UB. Before that, I taught for a few years at LSU in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My primary area of specialization is epistemology. The primary topic within epistemology that I've written on is skepticism. Skeptics challenge our claims to know what we think we know. And I've written about the nature of these challenges and the nature of some common responses to these challenges and how successful or unsuccessful different ways of responding to skepticism may be, and what all of this teaches us about the human condition. Another area of specialization of mine is experimental philosophy, where I do empirical psychological studies of how people think about philosophical issues. Some of my studies concern epistemology. I look at how some people think about knowledge. But I also do experiments outside of epistemology. The topic that I published most on is whether people are moral relativists, what kinds of people are most likely to be moral relativists, whether people think that morality is objective or subjective. So I have an interdisciplinary focus in my research and oftentimes in my teaching as well. So I'm a member of the Center for Cognitive Science here at UB. And the goal in all of my thinking is to look at age-old philosophical debates and to bring them into dialogue with best areas of science that might have some chance of shedding light on these philosophical issues and debates. This is why, for example, one of the reasons I teach most every year is a course on science and religion. What can science tell us about whether we should or should not believe in a God that's behind the Big Bang or whatever? So there's a lot of different ways of being a philosopher, and the way that I've chosen is to interact with a lot of contemporary science and to do some of that contemporary science myself. But there's this constant back and forth between the science and the age-old philosophical question, with each sort of component hopefully enriching the other. So that's what I do. All right, now for this course. So this is a course on epistemology. As I note in the syllabus, epistemology is that subfield of philosophy dedicated to asking about the nature and scope of human knowledge, asking whether we really know what we think we know, whether reality is knowable, things like this. What does rationality and good evidence consist in? That's epistemology, and that's what we're going to discuss this semester. There's a couple of things about this course that are a bit different from other courses. One is the amount of active learning that I'm going to be asking you to do. So the traditional college course format has professors lecturing and has the lecture at the center of the course. And even if it's lecture plus class discussion encouraged, still it's mostly the professor telling you stuff. And after the professor tells you stuff, the professor asks, hey, what do you think about that? Or in philosophy, can you think of objections to the theory I've just articulated? Or how compelling do you find these arguments? Something like that. But the lecture is has been front and center traditionally. It puts students in a kind of passive position. Now, you do have to actively pay attention. If you just zone out and let your mind free associate about the night before, Netflix shows you've been binging and so on, okay, you're you're not going to get anything out of the course. You do have to actively concentrate, actively direct your attention to the lecturing professor. So there is a kind of activity you need to do, and maybe you take notes too along the way, and maybe you ask questions. Asking questions is quite active, but most people don't do that at all. Most students take just a few notes, but for the most part don't take any notes. And so for the most part, you're there fairly passively, even though there's something active about listening to the lecturer. It's a low-level kind of activity. And I used to do lots of lectures. Not anymore. And that was before the pandemic hit. In recent years, I've been structuring my courses to encourage more active learning, more active engagement from students. So there's not going to be lectures for this course. We're going to have active discussions, and you're going to need to do a lot. So you're going to need to be saying more than you might be used to. All of it in writing, rather than, in an auditory manner. But on the traditional college format, you don't say that much. The professor does the saying. And when it comes around to test time, okay, you have to say some things on paper to answer the test questions. And if you have to write a term paper, then you say some things there. And then rarely, if the philosophy professor requires homework, okay, then you got to say stuff. But for most of the years that I've been here at UB, philosophy professors have not required any homework assignments. They've just given 2 or 3 exams and a paper. So there's only 3 or 4 assignments you have to do throughout the semester. And of course, you're required to attend lectures and supposedly required to take notes, but no one's ever going to check your notes. So there's 3 or 4 things, these 2 or 3 tests and a paper, that you have to do where you've really got to be actively thinking. But the rest of the time, you just kind of sit there. And the professor talks, and you pay attention. And the professor tries to get you to talk, usually with, in a not super duper successful way. And I used to do courses just like this. One way in which you're passive, I've already mentioned. You're kind of passive through the lecture time. You're supposed to listen, but only a third of the course really listens at a time. But there's another respect in which you're kind of passive through this traditional course setup. Through my earlier years here at UB, I would just have the 2 or 3 tests and an exam paper. And what that meant is you could kind of coast, take it easy until right before test time, and then you got to sort of really catch up on all that reading, which you weren't doing at all, and really make sure you understood Socrates and whoever else it was you're talking about in the course, and maybe ask lots of questions right before test time. And then you take the test, and then what do? You coast for a good while until it's almost time for test number 2. So the traditional format, in addition to having lectures front and center at the center of the course, also featured a small number of large assignments that counted for lots of points. This meant that you were students were kind of encouraged, they were basically told to be kind of mostly passive until right before there's that test time, right before it's term paper time, right before it's final exam time. So you're encouraged, made to be active only some of the time. So researchers who study education and educational outcomes have found that there's far better educational outcomes. You learn more, you understand the material at a deeper level, and you retain it in memory longer if you are more active in your learning than this format allows. So one format that allows for more active learning is a larger number of smaller assignments that count for less instead of small number, big assignments count for more. So that's one thing we're going to do this semester. So there's a number of assignments, but individually they don't count for a whole lot. But the idea is you'll need to be engaged to some degree, not in this massive degree that you would have to do if you like put off your term paper until right before it's due, and then you got to sort of work, not shower, not sleep, not see your friends, and just work. The intensity or degree of engagement on each of these smaller assignments is far less than that scenario I just depicted. But the engagement comes more regularly, more often. And many studies show overwhelmingly that your engagement with the course and your learning is going to be better by having you more regularly, more often engaged to a less intense degree. So that's one thing about this course. I'm not going to lecture. You're going to be active. Now, another thing about this course, which you will see on the syllabus if you haven't already accessed the syllabus, is that for the first 1/3 of the course, you will be doing epistemology without reading a scrap of it. There won't be a reading assignment until week 6, I believe. Let me just check. Is that right? It's week 6. That's right. For the first 5 weeks of the course, you'll be philosophizing. You will be doing epistemology in these things that I call reflective equilibrium assignments. So I'm going to give you thought experiments and ask you theoretical questions, all of which you will answer and submit through UB Learns. So some theoretical questions will ask you to reflect on an abstract level about knowledge, evidence, belief, and truth. Some of the time I will give you concrete cases. I'll say, here's Jones. Jones is in this situation, this kind of environment. He looks around him. This is what he sees. This is the evidence and information that he has available. On the basis of that information, he forms a belief. Do you think he was rational for doing that? In forming that belief, did he come to have knowledge? And you're going to have to explain your answers to each of these questions. So I'm going to ask you a bunch of epistemological questions like that, about the nature of his evidence or reasons for this character's belief, about whether it counts as knowledge, whether it's rational for the character to act on the belief. So on the one hand, there'll be abstract questions, not about any character in a concrete situation, abstract questions about epistemological concepts that I'm going to ask you to reflect about. And then some of the time I'm going to give you concrete cases to make epistemological evaluations of. So these I call reflective equilibrium assignments. I'll explain that, why I've called them that at some later date. I've been doing these reflective equilibrium assignments like this for a couple of years now, and they've worked very well. So this isn't the first time that I've started a semester with 0 reading assignments. It's just you doing epistemology. And I started this before the pandemic, and there's a few reasons why I do it. I've already mentioned the importance of active learning. Well, when you're doing the epistemology instead of reading about someone else, probably dead, who has done epistemology, you're obviously actively engaged, really actively engaged. But there's another important reason as to why I've done this. I realized that as you work your way through the philosophy major, there isn't a course like this where you're asked to construct from the ground up your own theory. Now you are, of course, in most courses asked to write a term paper. And in that paper you're supposed to share your own thoughts. True. Yeah, okay. Usually the papers go like this. In the syllabus, there's like reading number 1 and reading number 2, which disagree with one another. And so maybe you write your paper defending reading number 1, author number 1, against the objections offered by author number 2 in reading number 2. Or maybe you look at reading number 1 and reading number 2 and you say, well, they're both partly right and partly wrong, and you sort of look for a middle way that sort of synthesizes the best insights of both. And you are doing philosophy. When you articulate your own middle way, or you articulate your own response to objections, or maybe you articulate your own objections, you are doing philosophy. You're not doing it from the ground up. You're doing it in a partial sense, and I thought it'd be a very useful activity, a very useful exercise to take students all the way through from 0 all the way up to week number 9 it is. Week number 9, the only assignment for week 9 of this course, that's about 2/3 of the way through the course. The only assignment for that week is, on the basis of everything you've done so far in this course, synthesize all the things you've written in your reflective equilibrium assignments and on the discussion board, and tell me what you think knowledge is. Construct your own theory of knowledge. By the time we get to week 9, you will have done a greater degree of construction of your own philosophical theory than you will have done in any other course. And that's a useful exercise to go through, and what you learn from that exercise can be applied anywhere else, to an ethics course, a metaphysics course, philosophy of science, whatever course. So precisely because there aren't other courses offering this tutorial in complete theory construction, I thought it would be a very useful and worthwhile thing to do in this course. I also think it's a lot of fun. My students tell me that as well. So that's the reason why there are no reading assignments for the first 5 weeks, and even when we do start to get into some reading assignments, you're still going to be asked to actively think about and actively construct your own approach to them. So these are 2 unique features of the course, the active learning component of the course and the theory construction from ground zero part of the course, which means no reading assignments for initially. You will have some reading assignments in the middle part of the course. There will be, it looks like about 6 assignments that I'll post on UB Learns in article form. They're available as free PDFs. And then for the last 1/3 of the course, we're going to read this book called Disagreement by Brian Francis, which you'll need to purchase, and I've given links in the syllabus to purchasing either a paperback or an ebook version of the text. Okay, so until we get around to actually working with this regular book by Brian Francis in the last final 1/3 of the course, everything else we're going to do is going to happen through UB Learns. So I'm going to give you reflective equilibrium assignments to write about through UB Learns. I have already posted reflective equilibrium assignments 1, 2, and 3 for week 1. And then over the next few days I'll post more assignments for the coming weeks. And you will access these through UB Learns. There are instructions on UB Learns about how to submit them. So on UB Learns, I don't believe I've said this yet, but there are a few areas of our course page that I've set up. One is under course information, where I place the syllabus and an outline of all the assignments. The outline is really handy to be able to take in a kind of a single glance or two all the various things you're going to be required to do, and then also a grading rubric that I will use to grade your participation in an online discussion boards throughout the semester. So there won't be lectures, but there will be discussions. You will be participating you'll have to contribute threads and replies to replies on the discussion board section of UB Learns every week of the semester except the first and the last. Oh, and I guess maybe except for that 1 week where you're writing your paper. Yeah, except for the middle of week 9 where you're writing your theory of knowledge. But so basically, for most all the course, we're gonna be discussing together, not in person, not synchronously, but asynchronously through Blackboard that is UB Learns, discussion board forums. I'll give you something to discuss. You'll write in. People will reply to you. You'll reply to them. I'll reply to all of you. So I'll be an active participant in these discussion boards. So we'll discuss epistemology together. Not in person, not through Zoom, but in the discussion board. And I lay out all the criteria that I will be using to judge your participation. There's about 10 dimensions. There are 10 dimensions, which you can read through. There's your responsiveness to the philosophical issue that I posted about and told you to respond to. There's quality of your arguments. There's the clarity with which you articulate what you're going to say. There's the relevance, that's how well you actually stay on topic. Originality, quality of writing. I mean, if what you write is just this big mess of spelling errors and grammatical, we can't make sense of what you're saying, that's a problem. Some spelling errors, of course, are going to be fine if we can still tell what you're saying. But it gets in the way more often than you'd think. So read over this rubric, which explains in detail what it takes to have an excellent contribution to a discussion forum, or a fair or poor contribution. So these are the criteria I'm going to use, and I'm going to grade. I'm going to assign you a grade for all 8, every single discussion forum. And I believe there's 18 of them. You get a separate grade for each forum. So we're going to do a lot of discussing together. Again, this is part of the approach to active learning, actively discussing, actively replying to other people. You got to think about what someone is saying to reply to just what they've said. I'm going to take off points. I'm going to grade you lower if you say you're replying to what they said, but you're not really paying attention to the actual words in their thread. You're just kind of talking. You have to actively pay attention, and when people reply to you, you're supposed to reply to them. That requires active engagement. I think you'll find it interesting and worthwhile. So on the UB Learns page for our course, I've got these 3 things under course information: syllabus, outline of all your assignments, and the rubric that I'll use to grade your discussion board contributions. Then there's another tab entitled Weekly Schedule and Assignments, and here I'm going to place separate learning modules for every week. Right now I've only got one for week 1. You click on the learning module for week 1. A schedule for week 1 opens up for each of the things you're going to do on particular days that they're due. And then you're going to click there and see things like reflective equilibrium assignments and these other things called statement evaluation assignments. And I'm going to use this thing called adaptive release, which you may or may not have seen in other courses. Adaptive release means this: when you click on the learning module for week 1, what automatically appears is a schedule for week 1. What are you going to be doing all week 1? Something else that appears is reflective equilibrium assignment number 1. But what doesn't appear is reflective equilibrium assignment 2 or reflective equilibrium assignment 3. They're already there on UB Learns, but they're not visible to you. They're visible to me. You don't get to see reflective equilibrium assignment 2 until you've clicked submit on number 1. And you don't get to see 3 until you've clicked submit on number 2. There's reasons why I'm doing that. I want to take you through a set of active reflections on the nature of knowledge, belief, evidence, rationality, truth. But I want to take you through them on a particular order. And I want to say, just focus on this right now. Just answer these questions. Then I'll ask you something else. So I put a lot of thought into the questions that I want to ask you, the order in which I want you to respond to them. And for pedagogical reasons, educational reasons, there's going to be this thing called adaptive release. That just means you won't see all of the assignments appearing there. So the same thing is going to be true of week number 2. So let's see, what assignments do we have for week number 2? You'll need to have click submit on the prior assignment for the new one to come up, okay? So I'm going to use this throughout the semester. Those, I think, are the main things I need to go over. We're going to talk a lot about the nature of these central epistemological concepts I've already mentioned: knowledge, evidence, rationality, belief, and truth. I think we're going to have a good time discussing all these things. There's only one text you need to buy. We won't use it till the last third of the course, so you got plenty of time to find a cheap or possibly, well, there might be a free version out there. I don't know. That's all I have for right now. I'll put up some announcements. I'll communicate with you through announcements and email as we go along. And I'm looking forward to this semester.